Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, it's Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode on Her Success Story. We're in the interim of a series around women in finance, past, present, and future. And it's a very interesting time to be talking about the financial world and women in general in the financial world. Today's guest is Alexandra Lebenthal. Alexandra is a senior advisor for Empire Global Ventures and has led companies on Wall Street for 30 years. Most recently, she was the CEO of Lebenthal Holdings, a diversified financial service firm that included nation's largest women-owned broker-dealer. She has an incredibly family background in this that she'll hit on a few. What really intrigues me and what I love about Alexandra is she's a huge supporter of women in business. She was named as one of the top 50 women in wealth management by Wealth Management magazine, as well as a private asset manager. She has been named to Crane's top women-owned businesses, fastest growing businesses in New York. She's a mover and shaker, and more than anything, she's a down-to-earth, real woman who you could just sit down and have a conversation with and a cup of coffee with. So Alexandra, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So your family has an interesting background in finance and how this all came about as being a career zone for you. Can you share a little bit of of why you actually got into it? Because, just because our families do things doesn't mean we do things.
Right. And that's a great question because there always is this tie with your family that either drives you towards it or away from it, perhaps with some people, maybe both. But having grown up in a family Wall Street business with not just a father, but also a grandmother, while it may have been a unique situation to people outside, it was what I knew and very much became a part of who I was and who I came to be. So just very brief background, my grandmother and grandfather started a firm on Wall Street in 1925. It started a municipal bond firm dealing with individual investors. My grandmother was a full and equal partner. She actually worked until she was 93 years old. So wow. Not only did I know her very well as a working woman, but I also spent a year working with her when she was 91 and I was 23. My dad joined the business in the late 60s. He had an advertising and filmmaking background and was really more focused on marketing and communications. He was just masterful at that and really helped develop Lebenthal and our main product, municipal bonds, into a real brand in the city and in sort of tri-state area. I spent 25, 30 years at the company in one iteration or the other, but really spent much of my life and career working with at least one family member. So again, a very unique situation for some, but for me, just what I kind of knew and was used to.
And, it's interesting because sometimes, working with family has a great amount of benefits as well as a great amount of challenges. And I could have you back on one day when I do this whole thing about being, one day we'll do a series about being in business with family and the pros and cons of that. But what were some of the things that worked for you?
So one of the things that I really do count myself as being just a very, very lucky in the situation that I was in was that my dad, and this was probably in large part because he worked with his mother for so long, my dad had no issues or preferences about having a son or a daughter in the business and running the business. He just cared about having passion and being driven and the ability to communicate, which was also something very important for him. And so he really promoted me and pushed me and made me front and center. And so that did work extremely well. He would kind of joke at times like, oh, I guess they don't want me on CNBC anymore, but it really was all in jest. He was just absolutely thrilled to give me the ability to take the reins and be the next generation of Lebenthal at Lebenthal.
So it's interesting because, you know, where Alexandra and I are kind of in the similar genre age bracket. And it was not when I was brought up in a male-dominated world in printing, you know, I was not as welcomed. And to see, you know, women in finance in the past 25, 30 years were not as predominantly welcomed as they are, as the tide is changing today. What did you see with some of the other women in that time of coming forward? And was there any rallying together or ways that women gathered?
When I became CEO of Lebenthal in 1995, a woman who worked at another big, actually municipal bond trading firm had a dinner for me. She was more my dad's contemporary, and she invited a handful of women, most of whom I didn't know. And that was my first moment of really seeing women joyfully promoting and celebrating other women. And because I was 31 at the time, it really stuck with me and became something that I then did and continue to do, and still to this day, any way that I can not only celebrate a woman, but make sure that others who may not even know her can also celebrate her as well, is something that's really meaningful for me. There weren't in 1987 or 1994 as many women as there are on Wall Street today, but I do feel like we all somehow found one another. And when you're in a male-dominated industry like finance, the few and far between are the women who do not support other women. So there was this ready-made support group, again, amongst a smaller group of women, but I think in many ways that was even more meaningful then.
And where do you see things, you know, shifting? There's so many more women organizations today. As they're gathering, what do you see in the market today as far as the presence of women?
So just to take a step back for a second, when all the women's networks at different companies first started, and I guess that was probably late 90s, maybe, yeah. It was really almost like a women's coffee club, if you will. It wasn't like there was necessarily an understanding at the top levels of leadership in a company that these women's networks were actually very valuable tools for developing and identifying women. That has changed significantly over the years. And so now, not only are those networks very strong, but they're often chaired by some of the most senior women in an organization. So I think that is a big change that has happened. You obviously also have so many more women. You have so many more young women who aren't going to be put on the track of being an assistant type position, assistant trader, what have you, for their whole career. And I think that there also is more confidence amongst many of those younger women that they really do have a very meaningful future ahead of them if they stay in the game. And I don't know that that was the case 20 years ago.
You know, absolutely. And I think one of the cool things is, you know, back in the day, women were in all fields, not just in finance. We were the highest we could reach was kind of middle of the road. You know, we can, now you, having been CEO of a major financial and municipal bond company, led the way of what's possible for women. Where do you see, like, the women today? What tips do we have for them to navigate?
So I said this at the beginning, had a unique situation, and I will say that in some ways I had it much harder. Obviously, in some ways, though, I feel like I had it easier because I didn't have to navigate through a whole infrastructure as a woman and climb through and kick and do whatever I had to get up there. So I look at women who have very, very senior jobs now on Wall Street, and to me, those are the ones that have really, that are really showing the younger women what is possible. There are women who are running global equity capital markets. There are women who are running investment banking. There are women who are running wealth management, who have thousands of people in an organization and may have thousands or hundreds or dozens reporting to them. And so for those young women, they see, hey, you know, if this one made it all the way through this organization, then I can too. But I think it's also important to have different examples. So those are those women, yes, and I was different because of being a female CEO at a smaller firm. I was on CNBC, I was on trade associations, because when they needed the female CEO, you know, there weren't that many to choose from. So I became another role model that those young women could have. And I will say that one of the things that always just made me so happy was when we were very active in capital markets as a women-owned firm, and I would interact with a lot of those more junior women on syndicate desks or capital markets desks, or even in treasury departments at big Fortune 50 companies. Those moments when they would you know, ask me advice or want to have coffee or seek me out really actually meant a huge deal to me.
What do you see as some of the biggest learning lessons in your financial career that can be passed down to, you know, women who are building their careers in finance, who are even in top tier management right now? What are some of the lessons you learned that you could share forward?
Well, there's one very important lesson, and you and I have kids the same age, so they're young adults, and giving them those, you know, we have practice giving them the advice quite frequently. So one of the things, and I did have this with my daughter the other day, is ensuring that a young woman understands that this is not like middle school where the teacher is going to say, well, I know Alexandra knows the answer, and so I'm just going to, you know, have her talk to the class and show how smart she is. Nobody's gonna like be the one to promote you if you're not out there promoting yourself. You can't say, oh, it goes without saying, everybody knows that I work really hard. You have to make sure they know that you work really hard, because it's going to matter in terms of promotion, and it's going to matter in terms of compensation. So being somewhat of a squeaky wheel, although that obviously comes with its own set of issues, making sure you're a squeaky wheel and people like the sound of that noise. But I do think making sure everybody knows what you're doing and what you're accomplishing is very important. I
think, you know what, I want to highlight that for a second before we go on, because it's so important. We don't realize the importance of self-promoting ourselves. We take for granted, well, they'll know that I did that. They'll know I did that. They'll see that. And I just recently was coaching a CMO of a global corporation. And she was like, well, I was always promoted because people saw that I accomplished so much. And here I was like, well, this is a different culture in the organization you're at here. And they want you to let them know what you're up to. you know, it's a bigger company. You were at a national company before, now you're at a global company. It's our responsibility to let our organizations know what we're up to, what we're getting done, what we're accomplishing, and we need to self-promote more than we realize.
Right. Just absolutely. The other
so thank you for highlighting that.
Now, I say it all the time, and because it's so different from the way we did grow up. You know, being that one in class who you knew the teacher could always rely on you, and there was just that special connection because of that. Another thing that is so critical, and you and I have also talked about this at some length, is networking. Now, I remember when I first heard about networking, and I think it was sort of a new thing, and it was just all you heard about was that you need to network. And I think there often is a confusion about, what does that mean? Am I just supposed to go to a bunch of events and check that off the list and collect business cards, and that means I've networked? No, it's really figuring out, okay, how do I build my infrastructure of people who are going to be there for me, people who I will be there for them as well, people who maybe right now in my life there isn't a real meaningful business connection or personal connection for us, but at some point there may be. And just understanding that that person that you meet today, a few years down the line, you may look back and realize, oh my gosh, look at this stepping stone, the series of stepping stones, and from this person to this person to this to this to that, and look at where it got me. I just can't overemphasize how meaningful that is for everyone.
So if you're open, let's play this game.
Okay.
So, just so you understand how important what Alexandra is sharing, and everybody who's listened to her success story has heard me and my many guests talks about the impact of networking. And I often share when this comes up, it's like, oh, and this is how I met this person. So let's play how Alexandra and Ivy actually, and the networking in less than 6 months, what two women have done on crazy coast to coast levels. So here is, we're both at a benefit. We ended up sitting at the same table for possibly 10 minutes. That's all it took. That we were both at the same table, just grabbed a seat, things broke up. We were both standing there. I said, gee, like, let me say hello. I'm standing here looking at this woman. She's looking at me like, let's just say hello. I invited my daughter as a guest. They were highlighting some people from JP Morgan Chase, but my daughter works at JP Morgan. I had no idea who Alexandra was, no idea that you were speaking that day. You just looked like a nice lady from the neighborhood, so to speak. We got to talking, and you shared that we started, talking about, how we're both committed to the organization. It's a great organization. It's about women and, education around women in finance. It's one of the things that brought us together. And big shout out to Stacey Francis in that. My daughter's there. She's like, oh my goodness, that we start talking about our kids. From having a conversation about our kids, do you want to chime in here on this game?
Yeah. So you said, well, I do coaching work. And of course, when your child needs anything, that's, you're only as happy as your least happy child. So I immediately said, oh, my son needs, do you know anybody who coaches young kids out of college? And you said, well, what does he want to do? And I said, wants to be in the entertainment business, screenwriter. You said, oh my God.
Oh my God, my son. I have to tell you about my son. He's in the entertainment business. He was struggling, da-da-da-da-da.
And then you connected me with the woman that he worked with, whose entire job function is helping young adults get jobs in the entertainment business. She is a huge believer in networking as well. She started working with him, and he started working at a new position in the entertainment industry 2 weeks ago. So it was, that, and that really drives home one of the points I was making about networking earlier, is that was our meeting and connecting. It wasn't necessarily us helping one another directly, but it had this other incredibly meaningful benefit, which was helping my son. So it's just remarkable what it can do for you.
It truly is. And, we made that connection and it said, okay, let's just let's connect. And we eventually sat down, had some coffee and breakfast, because our offices are right by each other anyway, this, that, and the other thing. That launched into that. And then we're like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this series. And I was looking to tap your brain as I'm looking across the table at you. I didn't even realize, oh my God, you're the perfect person to have as my guest. You've been a leader in women in finance for 20, I'm just going to say 20 plus years and be really respectful. And then we talked about our kids and the network. What started as Women in Finance connection ended up being Sons in the entertainment business connection, back to Women in Finance connection, back to women in New York City and who knows who. And let's just stay connected because we like each other. And out of creating great relationships, what's possible in the long run?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I sometimes think it would be fun to take somebody that I met, a long time ago and just track all of the people that I met and things that came from it. I mean, it really is remarkable. And that is something that I have used very successfully in my career, is figuring out, and again, I mentioned this before, in the capital markets business, when we first got into the business of underwriting big corporate debt and equity issues, was, okay, I need to get to Apple's treasury department, or I need to get to Starbucks. Who do I know? How am I going to do that? And it was really the way I built that entire business. So it works.
It works. So the evolution of Alexandra. So you are no longer CEO.
Right.
What is your next phase in your game as a woman in the financial world, and how you're showing up today?
So first of all, let me say, and I do think this is really important. So my business went through a really painful time. It was public to a certain extent. Even aside from that, it was just a daily anguish for about a year and a half. And during that year and a half, I went through a mental journey, which started at the beginning of, I am going to have a big fat F on my sweater and everybody will know, and I didn't succeed, and just feeling shame and embarrassment about that, to, through the course of a year and a half, realizing I actually don't like what I'm doing anymore. And I don't want to just save something to keep doing something that I don't want to do. And you know what? That's fine and okay. And that feeling of freedom of being able to say, I don't care what anybody sees or thinks, I need to do what is right for me. That was such a weight lifted off me. And I wish that more people knew that it's okay to just say, I need to leave this behind. I'm not happy, and happiness and being fulfilled in your career is incredibly important. So with
okay,
that
so
there, and
and I'm going to chime in on that for a second before we go forward. So the day I woke up in 2007 and said, oh my goodness, I'm not going to die a printer. I was making a lovely living, a great living. And I'm not going to say even, some people say, oh, you mean like for a woman? I'm like, no. Compare, I was making a great living, and I always felt I was going to be a dancer. I was going to be a producer. I was going to be so much more. I had all these dreams, and I ended up being incredibly successful in the printing industry. So you stay, and you stay longer, and you stay longer, and you pass that 20-year mark. And when it's 20 plus and you realize and you wake up that day and saying, well, money isn't everything, and I'm not going to die a printer because I was meant to be so much more. I was meant to make a bigger impact. And how you then realign that, the reality of the goals,
right,
to creating a whole new you.
Right, exactly. And so in leaving that behind, all of a sudden there's this whole new landscape, and figuring out where the road actually started, sort of like the yellow brick road, I guess, is okay. How do I know where to go from here? Was confusing. And it took a while for me to even figure out that I was on a path. But what it led me to, and I'm still not even quite there yet, is the recognition that there's so many female entrepreneurs who have started businesses and are in a need for capital to expand and to grow, but have no network of where to find capital, and no real background, nor should they, of how to present to professional investors when they're raising money for the business. So I started working with a few female entrepreneurs in different industries, and really just felt my heart sing in a passion in a way that I hadn't in many years. So that's sort of the point at which the road clearly had, a pavement and lanes and whatnot and streets. But where I'm hopefully going is to really build a platform that will enable very meaningfully large female founded companies to really get to the next stage of their development, be it growth capital, be it public offerings, private equity, what have you. And obviously there's so much going on in the world of female founded businesses right now. So I feel like that can really play, and so actually not just play a role, but kind of fill a gap that doesn't exist right now.
And where, on a scale to 1 to 10, as we, us coaches sometimes do, 10 being high, where has your energy and your happiness meter shifted on a daily basis?
It's like in those shows where, they have people clap or something and it makes the meter go up. It's totally different. And I don't miss so much of what I did before. I will tell you, there is one thing that makes me sad, is that I look at women and minority-owned firms and big debt offerings today, and there's so many issuers that aren't including women-owned firms at all anymore, and I just can't believe that happened so quickly. But so I do feel this kind of sadness that there's no one there holding, waving that flag. But just so different in terms of, what I said before, that I just wasn't happy, and that when your daily existence is not something that makes you happy, and all of a sudden being, not having to do that anymore, it's night and day for me.
So last tips for women thinking about getting into the finance world, in the finance world, women who are established and growing, what do you think for them?
Well, I was thinking about this a little bit before, and going back to the late 80s, early 90s. And for the most part, women tended to get put into the areas where weren't necessarily going to make as much money. So I hate to say it, there were a lot of women who ended up in the municipal bond industry because there wasn't as much money to be made. No, disrespect to any of the successful men in that business. But today, that doesn't exist as far as I can see. The world is open, and there is this wonderful situation in that every bank wrings their hands about how to get more women and how to retain women. So a woman is really in much more control and in the driver's seat than she may realize. So recognizing that, hey, they need me, so let me, take advantage of that, I think is something really important. That may run counter to the way we often think and do things, but really sitting down and taking some time to think about that and how that's going to enable a woman to navigate her situation a little bit better. So I think that's one piece of advice. There are also so many areas that are changing. I mean, just think about the world of fintech. That didn't exist. I mean, even really 5 years ago in the way that it does today. So women, there's a wonderful anthropologist, her name was Helen Fisher, and her focus is always on the difference between men and women and focusing on women. And one of the things she always says is that if you go back to when we were all first developing as human beings, women became what she described as web thinkers. We had to keep the fires going, feed the children, keep them safe, do everything in this very, in this web, essentially, whereas men would go out and just kill the saber-toothed tiger or the woolly mammoth or whatever it was. And so they had this one sort of laser focused thing to do. So I think for any woman to just take a step back and kind of look at the world, look at the financial industry and think about, okay, what do I see? What do I see as the bigger picture? How do I see, if I'm a private equity firm or venture capital firm, what do I see going on around me that is part of this bigger web? And it isn't just about what my daily function is. So really bringing, more qualitative thinking to it as opposed to quantitative thinking.
I love that. And I think that happens to be so true. And one of women's greatest strengths, when you were sharing that story, there was a Broadway show, I'm probably going back 20 years, and I don't remember the name. I could tell you the lead was the guy from The Commit, which is frightening that I remember that.
Michael Chiklis.
Yes, thank you. See, why did women take a village?
Right.
And the opening dialogue, it was reference to, guys, it's not our fault. Our heritage is waking up in the morning, getting together with the guys, taking a spear, going out, killing a buffalo. You go from A to B, kill your buffalo, you bring it home. A woman's role, and in their heritage and ancestry, is we take care of the fire, as you're saying. We take care of the children, and then we go out into the forest and we look in many, many different areas, and we might find some sweet potatoes grown here and some other root vegetables grown here and some herbs and some things off the trees, and we're seeing things in such a big peripheral vision. And then we come home and we make it all happen. And he's like, and of course he was very funny with it. He said, it's not your fault when your wife says, can you go get a container of milk? And he said, yes, darling, no problem. And she goes, oh, and while you're at it, we could use some bread. He goes, right, milk and bread. And he goes, oh, and as long as you're going, can you add? And he came home with the container of milk because he got the one thing. So, and to your point, it's looking at one of the greatest assets of women leaders.
Yeah. And I actually have used that same analogy quite often when it comes to the way women invest, and that women shouldn't think they're not good at investing. In fact, they are even better at it because they take this web view, this long-term view, this life planning view, as opposed to what do I want to invest in today that's going to go up tomorrow. And as we speak at this moment, there's nothing.
So how can our listeners who are intrigued and want to follow you?
So now you're going to make me start doing more things. I do post on LinkedIn various articles about women and the opportunities for financial services firms to really look at the opportunity with women-led businesses and things that they can do the day after International Women's Day, instead of just doing on that one day. So I think LinkedIn would probably be the best way. And I always love hearing from people. I love hearing from young women and being as helpful as I can in any way. It's so easy to connect with people and just share any advice along the way.
Awesome. Well, Alexandra, thank you for joining us here today on Her Success Story. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight regarding women in finance and their futures from the past through the present and the future.
Great. Thank you for having me.
And listeners, remember to let us know on the comments below your biggest takeaways and the biggest insights that reached you on today's interview, as well as remember to hit subscribe. We come into your inbox every Monday morning. See you next time on Her Success Story.
Your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.